The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, hello, and welcome everybody. Nick Cortina here from Exago, and we're very excited to bring you another Exago support lab. And today we're going to be talking all about custom filter functions. Now, before we do go any further, as some of you may already know and are probably anticipating, I just want to make sure that my voice is coming through okay. You folks can see my screen, so if both those things are all right, do us a favor and just let us know in the questions pane. Type either a Y, a yes, a funny joke that you heard the other day, something to let me know that I'm coming through all right. Okay, awesome. And it looks like we're getting some folks coming in and saying that I am coming through. That's great. So we're all set to get started. So as I mentioned, my name is Nick Cortina, and today we're talking about custom filter functions in Exago. So to give you just a bit more perspective on what explicitly we'll be covering today, we're just going to give a brief overview on custom filter functions, where they are, where we might choose to use them. We're going to take a look at copying some of our base functions, so that way we can better tailor them to fit some of our use cases as necessary. And then finally, we're going to take a look at a slightly more complex example where we actually utilize a database call to generate a new value that we can then use for the purpose of filtering. So with that content in mind, what I'm going to do is jump over to my Exago instance, and we'll start talking right about these custom filter functions. So I'm going to navigate into my report tree, and I'm actually just going to open a brand new Express view for a second here, just to talk briefly about what custom functions are in general. Oh, and it looks like I'm sharing. There we go. My screen share is working correctly now. No. Oh, all right. Hang on. Having some technical difficulties. Let's see. Okay. All right, so it looks like my screen is finally updated here. So on our new Express view, I'm going to dig into my sales category. I'm going to open up this orders table. As some of you folks are fairly familiar, we're looking at North here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag this order date over onto my canvas, simulating the beginning of creating this Express view. And if I use my radial menu and I go to the right-hand side, that'll be what we are probably familiar with as using our standard filter capabilities. And we can see here that now we've got this filter on our order date, and we've got this f of x icon here. Now, while we could certainly go in and manually specify the date we calendar picker, or hit the drop down here to see some live values from the data set, the other thing that we can do here is use the f of x icon, and that's going to be how we access our custom filter functions. Now, these filter functions are, generally speaking, going to be dynamically calculated based off some example. Today's date is always going to go and take a look at whatever today's actual date is, and that'll be the value we use for comparison. In general, custom filter functions are going to be what we want to leverage whenever we need this filter value to dynamically update itself based on some other given conditions. As we can see here, using the function today, we'll always go in and put in today's value. Now, we have some other options here. We'll notice like yesterday, tomorrow, some other values like today plus 7 days, today plus 30, something similar with minus, and we can do things like first day of current month, last day of current month, same thing for the year, etc. But one of the first questions that I often get when new clients come on board is, well, what happens if we click down in this list and we don't see the threshold that we're looking for? We don't see the date range that we're interested in. As a quick example, for whatever reason, maybe you're interested in today plus or minus 45 days instead of, say 60 or 90. With that in mind, let's actually jump back to our admin console for a second so we can see what it would look if we wanted to add in those two functions. Let's continue with that example of today plus or minus 45 days. So in my admin console, I'm going to take a look down at the extensions category here. Now, this is really where all of our custom code lives, and that's going to be our custom functions, normal functions in the formula editor, server, action events, and potentially custom options. But today, we're going to be interested in our filter functions. Now, as I expand this list, you're going to see the full collection of custom filter functions that Exago ships with by default. Now, while this is really nice, as I mentioned, maybe you look at this list and you say, well, that doesn't actually cover the use cases that we care about or that we're interested in. With that in mind, we could go ahead and hit add to add a new custom filter function here. And while we could write all of this content ourselves, the other thing you might be saying is, well, I can go in and access my admin console, but I don't have a ton of code experience. I don't know how to just, go in here and write a function that's going to give me whatever today minus 45 days is. The nice part here is if I were to take something like today minus 60 days, I can actually open up that filter function, and I did that just by double-clicking the line item here. And now I can see the actual function code that's utilized to create today minus 60 days. Without fully understanding code here, I can take this function and copy it. And if I go to my new custom filter function and I add that as my function code, I know that this is well-formed code because we copied it from an existing working function. And the other thing I can, probably reasonably say here is, well, if this is minus 60 to take away 60 days from today's date, if I were to change this to a 45, we'll be doing the same thing 45 days back. So again, the nice part here is if this case that's close to something that we already have here, but not quite something that's already been established, we can use any of these existing functions to generate the new functions that will fit our use cases. Now, we've added in our program code here, and for those of you who are familiar with either custom functions, server, or action events, this window probably looks familiar. Here, you'll notice that we are going to specify the language we're writing this program code in. In the case that we copy a base function, this will be C#. Again, if we needed to, we could always go back to one of the other existing functions to see that information as well. Navigating back to my new custom filter function, we'll also have the ability to input any references to any DLLs that we might want to utilize in this custom filter function. And one note, and this will come into play a little bit later in the more complex example, but any DLLs that we want to utilize that aren't present in the global assembly cache will need to be copied to Exago's bin directory so that we can access them here. The other thing we can do here is supply any namespaces we'd like to utilize in our code as well. Now, while this part is fairly consistent with some of the other pieces that we've may have looked at by way of server, action events, or other custom functions, the other thing that we'll have to actually input here are going to be a name as well as an actual description for our custom function. So for our name, this is probably best served as something like today minus 45 days to remain consistent with some of the other functions that are already exposed here. We can enter in a description, and for now I'll just enter in something a little more user-friendly with spaces between my words here, today minus 45 days. The other thing we'll notice here is we've got a filter type. Now, depending on the type of data field that we pick when we go to filter, the potential filter function options we see are going to be mitigated depending on the comparison between the filter field we've picked type and the type specified on each of these custom functions. Now, looking at this left-hand side, you'll notice this icon here, which is consistent with our date time options that we, date time icon that we use for anywhere where you're searching in the application and you might specify just show date time fields. That's what this icon corresponds to. So in this case, we can see that all of our base custom filter functions are date time functions. And the complex example we'll take a look at is a numeric function. So for any date value we add, we'll see this whole collection of custom functions in addition to the new that we're adding here. But for any numeric fields, we're just going to see this top custom filter function as an option. And with that in mind, I'm going to keep this one as a date custom filter function because today minus 45 days, we probably want that to actually return a date value. The last thing we can set here is the list order, and this is going to dictate where in our list of custom filter functions this specific function will appear. Generally speaking, if we generate some custom filter functions that we know the users are going to be heavily relying on, we'll want those to be higher up in the list, generally a value of 0 or 1 or something of that nature, to keep it near the top to make sure users don't have to scroll far down through the list to access that custom filter function. Now, with all that in mind, it looks like we've got a fully formed today minus 45 days function. So we can use the green check here to just confirm that this compiles successfully. And then when we hit the apply button down below, that'll actually save this to our configuration. So if I jump back to Exago, I'm going to refresh my base Exago instance here so we can pick up those changes that we just applied. And what I'm going to do now is let's just open a new Express view for a moment. And on opening this Express view, I'm going to once again navigate into my orders category. I'll drag over order date, and I'll use my radial menu to go to filter here. And now, if we click this f of x icon, we can see today minus 45 days is the first custom filter function that appears in my list. On selecting, that's going to take today minus 45 days, and it'll always populate the actual data value that is returned from the custom filter function here, so we can see explicitly what that function is giving us back with regards to the comparison value here. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment. Again, we're covering just some of the simple use cases, but I want to just make sure that everyone's staying with us and there's no questions up until this point. So from here, while these are some of the base cases for custom filter functions and really just the initial lay of the land, if you will, the next thing I'd really like to show you folks is an example that we think is a little bit more complex and might give you some more options with regards to how you are actually filtering your Exago reports. So I'm going to navigate back to my admin console for a moment here. And I'm going to close out some of my existing functions. I'm using the middle click on my mouse to do that. And let's think for a moment that maybe we want to be able to call out to a database and generate some given threshold value and then use that for our filter. So again, in this case, we're going to be doing that with the Northwind data set. And as an example that we came up with, let's pretend that we're curious about seeing which particular order items are receiving our highest discounts. And in theory, that might allow us to make a more informed decision about what possible discounts we should be offering and what items we should be offering them on. So in order to do that, it might make sense for us to take an average of the discounts we provide across all individual order items and then filter our report to show only order items that are above that average. So with that in mind, I've written this average discount custom filter function. So I'm going to double click and open that up and let's dissect this a little bit and get a bit more of an understanding of what this code's actually doing, and then we can go see it in action. So here, with regards to name description, I've kept those consistent, just said average discount. We'll notice my filter type here is a decimal. And if we look at my possible filter type options, I've got date, string, integer, decimal. If I want to take the average value of a discount, I know from looking at the values ahead of time that a lot of those are decimal values. So in this case, if we're taking an average of decimal values, we probably want that returned result to be a decimal as well. My list order here is going to be 0, and that's just going to allow me to pick this average discount from the top of the list whenever we do filter on a numeric field. And looking down below here, we can see that I'm going to leverage a couple DLLs here. Two of those are going to be system.data DLL and system.xml DLL. And then the other DLL that we see here is SQL utils. Now, this DLL actually does come in the Exago bin directory. And for anyone who's familiar with our folder management and is utilizing that assembly, you may have actually interacted with this SQL utils DLL before by virtue of working with that code assembly as well. I'm including a couple namespaces just so I don't have to keep scoping everything out down below here. And when we take a look at the actual code, the first thing I'm doing is establishing a connection with our data source, and I'm specifying the type of data source here. And then we can see I've just got my, my plain text connection string here. If anyone feels like trying to hack my Northwind database, you're more than welcome to. I don't really have anything interesting to hide. Going a little bit farther down here, we can see that for this connection, we can actually establish a specific SQL statement that we'd like to execute. And while my SQL skills are a little bit green, I was able to come up with this statement that'll just get us the average discount across all of our individual line items from the order details table. The next call here is going to actually execute that SQL query on the data source, and that'll return a data set for us. And because we're just getting an average across all records, this data set is just going to have a single row. And so going and getting that specific item from that single row return will convert that to a decimal and then push that back as the return value here. So with this in mind, I'm going to jump back to Exago for a moment here. I'll close out the Express view. And let's jump into our lab content, custom filter functions, and I've got this order items above average discount report. And so to give you folks just a little bit of perspective here, if we take a quick look at our sorts on this report, I'm just sorting on my order ID. I've got a group header on that order ID, and I'm just saying, hey, this is the order ID here. And for each order, I'm going to show product, quantity, unit price, and discount information. And I'm going to display all of that in my detail down below. Finally, if we take a look at our filters here, I've got my order details.discount, and this says greater than or equal to, and it's this big, ugly decimal number here. But in reality, this is actually using that average discount. And so one of the other things I want to mention here is if you open up or come back to a report where you're utilizing a custom filter function, what you can do to confirm that this is not a hard-coded value and that it is using that filter function is look at the summary down below here. And if you see the actual plain text name of the function, that is the indicator to you that the next time you access this, this value will be generated once again. I've set it to prompt us for a value here as well. So what we can do is actually execute this report. And I didn't mention, but that operator there was set to be greater than or equal to. So again, we're going to be taking a look at any of the specific line items that are above that average discount threshold. And if I were to clear this value out, I could still use my dropdown to modify this if I wanted and say greater than or equal to, some other arbitrary value. And then again, if I'd like, I can still use that f of x icon to say, well, nope, you know what, bring me back to that average discount. I can hit OK, and that'll go ahead and actually execute the report. And so looking at the resulting output, we can see that there will only be line items with a discount that's over that given threshold. And that's actually going to be it for the content of the lab today, keeping it nice and simple. So thank you folks very much for joining us today. We are going to stick around for a few more minutes to answer any questions. And the other thing that we wanted to mention here was we are curious to know what you folks are really interested in with regards to lab topics going forward in 2019. So after this lab, there's going to be a feedback form, and we'd definitely love it if you folks could let us know what topics you're most interested in, because we really want to make sure that the content we're delivering is really tailored to what you folks want to see so that you can make sure you're getting a lot of value out of these webinars. So that said, definitely leave us feedback. Let us know what you're interested in. Have a safe and happy holidays, and we'll see you folks in the new year.